All right, welcome everyone to our webinar today. This is Jeremy Rogers, the General Counsel and Director of Government Affairs at Oregon Realtors. And today we are very lucky to have Dave Honeycutt with us, who is the head of the Oregon Property Owners Association and also is the chair of the Governor's Wildfire Programs Advisory Council. And last week we sent out an email to our membership linking to the new draft wildfire hazard maps and providing some of the context about sort of what's happened since the last maps came out in 2022, as well as what happens next and opportunities for comment. And we wanted to just provide some additional details and background and context. And there's really no better person to have on to do that than Dave. And before I hand it over to Dave to go through some slides, I also just want to thank Dave and his organization, the Oregon Property Owners Association, which is such a wonderful partner to the Oregon Realtors and really part and parcel of all the work that we do and all the things that we accomplish in the legislature related to land use and property rights. His organization is a fierce defender of property rights and really the best experts on land use in the state. And we are very grateful for Dave's expertise and Samantha and the rest of his team and the opportunity to work together. So Dave, I'll hand it over to you. I think what we'll do is hold questions for the end. I've got some that I'd like to ask, and we encourage members of the audience to put questions in the chat as well, and we'll get to those time permitting. So take it away.
Ready for me, Jeremy?
Yeah, take it away.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I think we were here just about 2 years ago when we had the first map rollout. Now, the first map rollout was not successful. It was not very well planned. But this time I think they've spent quite a bit more time, and we've got a better product, and we'll go through that. I have quite a few slides to go through. As Jeremy noted, I am not only the president of the Oregon Property Owners Association, I am also chairing this year, fortunate to be chairing the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council, a 19-member council appointed by the legislature to advise the governor and the legislature on our wildfire programs and how they're doing and what we recommend for change. I am the rural residential representative on the council and fortunate to have the chairmanship this year. But I wanted to be clear that I am speaking on behalf of myself and OPOA today and not the council. And so with that, let's get started. We're going to go not just about the maps, and I know you're all interested in the maps, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on that. But we're also going to give an update on Oregon's wildfire program itself. We are at sort of a fork in the road with our wildfire program, and where we need to be and where we're heading may not be the same thing. And so we need to talk about that. And I'm hoping by the end of the presentation, I can convince you that, number one, this is a problem, and number two, that we need to encourage both the legislature and Congress to do a little bit more to help us try and solve this. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's a little background. Those of you remember that were around here in 2020 on Labor Day, that was a particularly dark weekend, both figuratively and literally. We had mega fires throughout Oregon, and I don't know if you all remember, but the Sunday of Labor Day weekend, it was hot. It had been hot, typical August, early September. It had been hot for weeks. It was dry. And then on that Sunday, we had just a horrendous east wind. Went through the state, and every fire that we had, August and September being our two most active wildfire seasons in Oregon, every fire that was burning in Oregon at that point essentially blew up. And so by Labor Day proper, we had 5 separate mega fires going in Oregon, and I've listed them there on this slide. Each one of those was over 100,000 acres. I had friends in Clackamas County that were out there fighting fires by themselves with equipment, with construction equipment that they owned and maintained. Basically, there were a lot of people that had to work really hard just to save their own neighborhoods and their own homes. And then, of course, we had the Almeda fire down in Jackson County, where we lost almost 2,600 homes in Phoenix and Talent. That was actually, we believe, was actually an arson-caused fire. And one of the things, if you notice, if you read the reports and keep up on wildfires, one of the things you'll see is quite a few of these fires are actually caused by arson. We have I think there's one, I think it's called the Park Fire down in California. They arrested, that one's burning now. They arrested a gentleman that they caught pushing a car that he had set on fire down into an area where there was all kinds of dry wildland fuel, and started that fire. There are just some people here in this world that should not be here, and unfortunately they are. And so a lot of the fires that we're experiencing now are actually arson caused. So you can just see the number of homes that we lost in that Labor Day wildfire is absolutely horrific. And the one thing that I knew right after those fires happened, and I lived actually right across the street. I live in Washington County. I think we were the only area in Washington County that had a potential wildfire. I was evacuated for 7 days at my place. The fire was right across the street, started from some kids who were camping down in the woods on Labor Day weekend, started a fire and never bothered to put it out. It started a campfire and never bothered to put it out. And so it was bad times, and we knew at that point that the legislature was going to act in the 2021 long session. All right, next slide. So act they did in the 2021 long session. The legislature passed Senate Bill 762. That really made a huge change to how we conduct wildfire policy in Oregon. It gave multiple agencies multiple tasks. It was a multi-year process. There was all kinds of funding available that the legislature made available to the various agencies, for Oregon Department of Forestry, Oregon State Fire Marshal being the two main ones to address wildfire. You know, when you have such a horrific event occurring right before the legislative session, I like to tell folks we have 90 legislators in Oregon. I like to tell folks we had 90 wildfire experts that session. And so what you end up with is a sort of an oh my God moment. And that's what we had with the legislature and Senate Bill 762. And of course, it also created a specific person in the governor's office, the wildfire programs director. The wildfire programs director from Senate Bill 762 is a gentleman by the name of Doug Graff, who served both Governor Brown and now Governor Kotek, who's doing an absolutely fantastic job. And is an outstanding advocate for the program. And then it created our council. Then in 2023, after we had the disastrous map rollout that we were here talking about 2 years ago, the legislature came back and passed Senate Bill 80. It did a number of things. I just highlighted a couple. It did far more than what I've highlighted. But what it did was it eliminated the risk classifications that had upset so many people. And instead of having risk classifications, it substituted what we call hazard classes. And it dropped those risk classes. Remember, at that time, we had 5 risk classes: extreme, high, moderate, low, and no risk. It dropped those and substituted high, moderate, and low hazard classifications for all the properties in Oregon. We also have Senate Bill 82 that I didn't list in the 2023 session, and we'll talk about that when we get to property insurance. Next slide. So we're here today, really because there are four main issues that I hear about. Now, Senate Bill 762 had 66 different sections. It does a lot more than what we're going to talk about today. But the four things that really I think I hear far more, and we on the council hear far more about than any of the other issues on Senate Bill 762 are Section 7, which is the risk map, the hazard map, the WUI and the hazard map. WUI, WUI, that stands for Wildland Urban Interface, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So it's the mapping section. It's Section 8, which is the defensible space provisions. It directs the Oregon State Fire Marshal to adopt defensible space requirements for folks around homes. Section 11, which is the land use piece. I will talk extensively about that. And then Section 12, which is the home hardening, the Building Codes Division, BCD, the requirements that if you are going to rebuild your home or extensively remodel your home in some parts of the state, you're going to have to build it to wildfire hardened standards. And then, of course, the last thing that Senate Bill 762 didn't address that we're going to talk about a lot today is the impact of these maps and the program itself on property insurance. And that's property insurance is regulated in Oregon by DFR, I think that's Division of Financial
Regulation.
Yes, thank you, Jeremy. Okay, next slide. All right, so here, this is your updated map. If you go to the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer website, and we'll get to that in the next slide. This is the map you will see. This is the updated. It's a draft map. It just came out on July 18th. This is the updated wildfire hazard and WUI maps that Senate Bill 762 requires the state to prepare. These maps were prepared in concert between Oregon State University and the Oregon Department of Forestry. The fire science folks at OSU worked closely with the people at ODF to map these, and they're mapped. The different colors you see on the maps represent the different hazard classifications. The orange being the high hazard classification. If your property is within that orange area, you are considered to be at high hazard for wildfire. If you are in the purplish colored, which is basically most of everything that isn't orange, that purple would be at a moderate risk classification. You're not high and you're not low. And then the green is low risk classification. So if your property is green, you have out of all the tax lots that were mapped, you are in one that has the least chance of being impacted by a wildfire in Oregon. They did this mapping for every single tax lot in Oregon across the state. And we'll get to this in the next slide, but you can find out exactly where you are if you go to the Risk Explorer and type in your classification. The other thing that they mapped, and this map doesn't show this, but they also mapped the wildland urban interface, and we'll talk about that in a second. And we need to know what that is, because whether you're subject to regulation, it depends upon whether or not your property is in the WUI. We refer to that as the WUI. All right, next slide. So this is the screen that you'll see if you go to Google and you type in Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer. And I would urge everyone to do this. This is a really good website. It is well, at least for me, and believe me, when you get to my age, technology is a challenge. And so I am certainly not the most technologically adept person in Oregon. And this was fairly easy for me to navigate through. So on the scale of, on the senior scale, I could handle this. So if you go to that's what you'll see if you go to the state's website, and you'll notice over on the left side of the screen, you can type in your address, and when you type in your address, it will call up your property, and you can get a homeowner's report that's specific to your property, that explains why your property is in the risk classification it's in, and whether or not you're in the WUI. So I've got an example that we'll go to and look at that. But this is a really dynamite site. I think the state did a really good job with this site, putting it together. And we'll come back to this slide quite a bit. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's the hazard classifications. We already talked about that. There are three hazard classes, the orange being the high hazard, the purplish color being the moderate hazard, and the green being the low hazard. And the OSU and ODF were directed by the legislature in Senate Bill 762 to base their hazard classifications on the four factors that you see there: weather, climate, topography, and vegetation. One of the things that OSU has made clear to us, both to the council and to the public at the events that they've held across the state. We just recently, actually most of June and early part of July, we went around the parts of the state that had the highest highest wildfire risk, essentially the orange parts of the state. A number of us went around, a number of the agencies and the council, and held public town halls where we brought all the folks from the different agencies around from town to town, and invited the public to come in and ask questions of each one of the agencies. If you had a question about the maps, the OSU was there. You could go talk to them. If you had a question about insurance, DFR was there. You could go talk to them, and so on and so forth. And we made it clear that the legislature assigned the maps based on those four factors. And one of the key, I think, factors that I kept hearing at OSU that the OSU scientists talked about was flame length. The higher the flame that would potentially, occur in a wildfire around your neighborhood, the higher the risk was. If you're in an area where you're going to have 4-foot flames, your house is a lot more likely to burn down than if you're in a neighborhood where you have a wildfire that's only going to produce 2 or 3 inch flames. And so flame height was one of the things that they factored. You can appeal under Senate Bill 762. Any property owner can appeal the risk classification they find themselves in. We'll talk a little bit about that too. That's sort of a hollow appeal. I'd like to fix that, but you can appeal it. So next, please. Okay, so this is these next two slides are important, and I want to convey this as best I can to you, and I hope you'll take this to heart. One of the things that we have found, and one of the questions we get is, are these maps really accurate? Essentially, why is all of Josephine and Jackson County orange? Why is the Willamette Valley? I mean, look at that map. You've got Salem there in the green. Why is the Willamette Valley? Why aren't they subject to any regulations? Why are they all low hazard? And why is, basically the good parts of Oregon, and that's me editorializing. Why are the good parts of Oregon all orange? And so is this really, did OSU and ODF do a really good job? So that's the question. How did the map compare to reality? And let's go to the next slide. So there's the actual fires that are going on right now. And if you toggle back and forth between what the map looks like and where those fires are, what you'll notice is that that map is extremely accurate. I know I know folks have questions about their individual properties, but I'm telling you, and this is from somebody that runs an organization that's skeptical of government regulation. We've spent a long time worrying about things like this, but these maps, the hazard parts of these maps are accurate. So if what you see holds up very well when you look and see where the wildfires are actually occurring and where we have wildfire risk. Next slide, please. All right, this is the map, and you can find this also on the Wildfire Risk Explorer map. You have to set it. They have a layer section on that website, so you can go from the hazard classifications to the WUI map. This is the WUI map. The areas in black and all the black dots indicate areas that the state considers part of the wildland urban interface, and there's the definition right there. The wildland urban interface is a geographical area where structures and other human development meet or intermingle with wildland or vegetative fuels. The idea behind the WUI, and it's a good idea in theory, the idea behind the WUI is that there are going, as we move further out of town, you get to the downtown, and then as you move out away from the downtown areas towards the edge of town, you get lower and less dense development, and you start to creep into the areas of the county that are undeveloped. And that area where you have some low density homes in with potential wildland fuels, areas that are outside the urban growth boundary and in more large acreage. Those areas are where if a fire starts, you're going to have an immediate impact and potentially cause a significant impact to a number of people really quickly. And so the idea behind the WUI is we're going to designate those areas that are wildland urban interface and try and focus our resources on those areas, because those are the areas, no pun intended, that would blow up in the instant, very quickly, in the instance of a wildfire. And so we need to direct our resources to those areas to make sure that we get the most bang for our buck and save as many people as we can. Not that we don't want to save somebody that's got a ranch house on 10,000 acres in Harney County. But if you have a ranch house on 10,000 acres in Harney County, the chances are you're probably pretty self-sufficient as is. And if we're directing our limited resources, we're going to need to direct those limited resources into areas where we've got homeowners that probably aren't as self-sufficient and where we have the potential for significant impacts quickly. That's the idea behind the WUI. And by the way, if your property is within the WUI, you can't appeal that designation. All right, next slide. So if we go back to slide 6, and then Katie, if you could take us no, there you go. If we go back to that slide, that's the Wildfire Risk Explorer. And then you, on the left side there where it says address search, and you type in your address for your particular property. And now if we can go back to the slide we were on, Katie. There we go. You can generate what's called a homeowner's report. And this is the homeowner's report for my property. I scratched out the address. You don't need to know where I live. Call me and I'll tell you. But it's rural Washington County. That's my house. That's my 3 acres. I am rural residential. And this is a good feature. What this shows is it shows your particular property. It shows the outline of your property. It shows where you are on the risk classification on the wildfire hazard value, which they use to determine whether you're high, moderate, or low. It shows whether you're in the WUI. And so it gives you all kinds of interesting data. If you look at my place there, it says 26.72% of properties in Oregon have a higher hazard value than mine. And so there are, doing the math backwards, there are 73 and change percent of the properties in Oregon that are supposedly more safe from wildfire than my place. Okay, next slide. So this is the second and third page from the homeowners report. The second page does a good job of explaining, essentially how the state got to where it is, what they did to create the maps, what the hazard classifications are, all of that. It talks about the WUI. It talks about how the WUI was mapped. And then the last page, which I really like, it lists the various agencies that are involved. And what I like on the last page is the how will the map be used section, which describes what the map will be used for, which is great. But more importantly, for our purposes, what the map won't be used for. The red there right in the middle of the map will not, in caps, be used to. And then it goes through that. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll highlight that. So this is, if you do a homeowner's report, this is what it will tell you. The map that is being used will not, and they cap it so that you're more likely to believe it, and I actually do, at least right now. The map will not be used to adjust insurance rates. We'll get back to that because that's one of the things that is the most hotly controversial. It won't be used to make property owners modify their existing homes, which is absolutely correct. That's the home hardening piece. That's the building codes division piece. And then this last one, obviously, for an organization like mine, is key. The map is not intended to be used to prevent development. In other words, it's not supposed to be a land use map where they're going to tell you what you can and can't do on your property as a result of the map designation. All right, next slide. So let's talk about how many people are actually impacted by this. If you look at the number of tax lots, and I got this information from Andy McAvoy at Oregon State University yesterday. Andy was one of the chief designers of the maps. If you look at the number of tax lots that we're talking about in high hazard WUI, that's both, those are properties that are both in the high hazard, the orange part of the maps, and also in the WUI and the wildland urban interface. They're in one of those black dots on the WUI map. There are about a little over 100,000 tax lots that are both high hazard and WUI. And that's important. We need to know that. Those 100,000 tax lots are going to be treated differently than everybody else. If we look at high hazard only, those are properties that are orange on the maps, but they're not in the WUI. They're not within one of those black dots on the WUI map. There's about 60,000 tax lots that meet that classification. And then if you look at the WUI itself, the number of properties that are within the black dots, regardless of how they're classified on the hazard, low, moderate, or high, there's over 1.1 million properties in the that are considered to be within the wildland urban interface. Now, why does that matter? And that should be why does hazard class, not risk class. Why does hazard class and WUI status matter? The reason it matters is because if your property is both within the WUI this is an and, not an or. It has to be within the WUI and within the high hazard classification. Then you're subject to the defensible space regulations in Section 8, the home hardening provisions in Section 12 of Senate Bill 762, And then there's a question, and we'll get to this, about additional land use regulations that comes from the Oregon Department of Land Conservation, DLCD. And also we have the question about higher property insurance premiums or potentially the loss of coverage. So really what you need to know, the most important question for all of you when you type in your property or a property that you've got on the market or a property that you're looking to buy or whatever, really what you need to know is is this property in both high hazard and in the WUI? Because if it's in both, then you're subject to those regulations. Okay, next slide. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about defensible space. What is it and how it works? So that's just a cover for that. Next slide. All right, so defensible space is going to be overseen by the Oregon State Fire Marshal. That's part of Section 8 of Senate Bill 762. That bill requires OSFM to prepare defensible space requirements. They're doing those by rule, and those will apply around dwellings. And so if you have a dwelling, again, it has to be in both the high hazard high hazard classification and within the WUI. If you have a property that meets both of those criteria, then you are going to be subject to defensible space regulations crafted by the Oregon State Fire Marshal. They are working on those. They're ready to go. Essentially, it's going to be a 50-foot defensible space requirements. Those rules have not yet been completed. However, they won't be completed until the maps are finalized, and we're still in the draft map phase for the hazard and the WUI maps. And so until those are done, OSFM won't complete their rules. Again, they apply only to, you have to be in both high hazard and in the WUI. What's a little bit frightening is that local governments have the authority under 762 to adopt defensible space requirements that are greater than OSFM rules. What we don't know from that is exactly what that means. Does that mean that they can go beyond, that a local government can say, we don't care if you're in high hazard, we're going to apply the defensible space requirements to moderate risk, moderate hazard properties and low hazard properties in our community? Or does that just simply mean that they can adopt more stringent criteria for high hazard WUI? In other words, we're going to say, even though the state only requires you to have 50 feet of defensible space around the perimeter of your home, we're going to bump that out to 75 feet. We don't know yet what that means. At some point, we may get there. We may not. We just don't know yet, and we won't know until after the OSFM maps or our rules are completed. There's exemptions in those. We fought hard to get exemptions to the defensible space requirements for farm crops. We were concerned that some areas of orchard would need to be cut off. Wine grapes and ornamental vegetation, what I refer to as grandma's rose bushes. So they're not going to be the defensible space regulations. I know people are worried about them and think that they're essentially going to have to cut everything out for the 50 feet around their home. That's not the case. I think folks will be pleasantly surprised when they see the defensible space requirements that OSFM comes with. And they'll be fairly easy to comply with. And then the only other question is whether or not DLCD, our land use agency, the agency that subtlety is not in their agency definition, whether they actually might try and do an end run around OSFM through land use regulations. We don't think that's going to be the case, but we are certainly watching that closely. All right, next step, or next slide, please. Okay, this is the home hardening slide. And again, what happened is Senate Bill 762 required the Building Codes Division to apply what they call R327 hardening requirements. That's a new section of the building code that prescribes a different set of building criteria for folks that either want to rebuild their home, just completely tear down the existing home, or maybe the home burned or was destroyed by wind or whatever, and they need to rebuild. Then if you're in high hazard and the WUI, then you're going to have to build to the new R327 standards, or if you do a major remodel. We haven't, as far as I think that's defined, but essentially it's got to be something fairly significant, a fairly significant change, both to the interior and the exterior of your home, before you're required to comply with the R327 home hardening requirements. They apply to both dwellings and accessory structures. So your garage, your pole barn, something in a rural area that an outbuilding that you would normally have along with your home, the R327 components are going to apply to that. We are not clear whether they apply to ag buildings. Ag buildings are exempt from building code standards, so we don't think they're going to apply to an ag building, but it's a question that we might get to at some point. We did a study back in 2021 when we were doing 762, when the legislature was doing that bill. Estimate cost, just the hardening costs are add somewhere between $7,000 and $12,000 to the cost of a new home. And unlike the defensible space requirements, where potentially a local government could go beyond what the standards are for that OSFM comes up with the building code. The building code is what's known as a mini-max code, which means it sets both the floor and the ceiling. So a local government that wants to go beyond R327 for their community is not able to do so. The building code standards are what they're going to be for home hardening. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of the things that worries me. This is the land use section. Senate Bill 762 did not assign a whole lot of responsibility to DLCD, the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, our land use agency. They didn't really give them a whole lot of duties under Senate Bill 762, primarily because DLCD is a planning agency. They really don't know anything about wildfire, anything more than any of us on this call do about wildfire. They're not the experts. They're not fire scientists. It's not within their job description. But unfortunately, out of all the agencies that are involved in Senate Bill 762, they are the ones that are the most aggressive and have the most significant agenda as far as development in Oregon. And this, unfortunately, wildfire gives them an opportunity to further goals that they may have that aren't related directly to wildfire, but meet some of their other goals. What you see over on the right side of this slide is the executive summary from a report that 1,000 Friends of Oregon produced in 2018. 1,000 Friends is the self-described land use watchdogs of Oregon. I can tell you, and those of you who have ever tried to develop anything in this state will know that if you're trying to use your property or get approval to do anything on your property and 1,000 Friends is involved, I 100% guarantee you they are not your friend. But nevertheless, 1,000 Friends is a land use advocate, typically on the side of not developing and leaving things as they are. And if you look at the policies from their 2018 report, and especially focus on number 2, they essentially have been advocating to use land use regulations to avoid development in high-risk areas, which is forest, rangelands, farmlands, and the WUI. Remember, we went back to our maps. We had over 1 million tax lots in the WUI. That would be 1 million tax lots where you wouldn't be able to build a house, regardless of the zoning of the property and regardless of whether or not you were high, low, or moderate risk classification. If we take out forest, rangelands, and farmlands, we're basically taking out the rest of the privately owned property in the state. We develop in Oregon on residentially on about 0.6% of the state of Oregon, which is, we've got about 1% of all the land in Oregon that's within urban growth boundaries, that's available for urban level development, and about half of that is zoned for residential use. So we basically house 99% of our people on about 0.5% of our property in Oregon. If we allow the legislature or DLCD to start using wildfire as an excuse to prohibit development in the rest of the state, we're essentially going to further hamstring ourselves to that 0.5%. And as long as we have people moving here, you can guarantee that we will be moving into smaller and smaller boxes, shoved more tightly together, and biking every day. For me, in a few years, riding my 10-speed Schwinn down to the senior center, which I don't think is likely. If that happens, I will be in Florida then. So land use is a big worry for us. Next slide, please. All right, so here's the question we get the most. And I mean, not just like, not like half of the questions we get. This is like 7 or 8 out of every 10 questions is, okay, what's this doing to my property insurance? These maps are going to raise my rates. They're canceling me because of these maps. These maps are a disaster, and I'm really mad. And I believe me, I get it. But let's talk about it. Next slide, please. All right, so property insurance, and if you see in that slide, that was one of the main questions we got in that the state got in 2022 when the maps were first rolled out, the disastrous July 2022 rollout. One of the questions that was one of the main things that people were upset about, the impact of the maps on their property insurance rates. Or not just rates, but underwriting. You know, some people were believed that their policies were canceled as a result of the maps, and so this was a big issue. So the legislature in 2023 passed Senate Bill 82. That bill prohibits insurance carriers from using the state wildfire maps for either rate setting or for underwriting. So we now have a state law that just flat out prohibits insurance carriers from using the wildfire maps to impact either their willingness to write policies or to raise rates. But again, that's the most common concern that we hear about the maps. And I understand, and I sympathize. I live rural residential too. My property rates my tax rates went up as well. Now I'm in moderate WUI. I'm not in high WUI, but nevertheless, my rates went up as well. But what I can tell you, and this is this third bullet point here, I'm just telling you that the state's maps do not impact property insurance rates. They don't. And the reason that they don't is because the insurance carriers who are for-profit businesses, they've had their own risk mapping criteria for years. It well predates the state risk map and now hazard map. The insurance carriers have been mapping for wildfire hazard for years. And all of those maps that they have are proprietary, which means they're private. They're created by each insurance company. They are not they are not available to the public. I asked early on, well, why don't we just, why don't we take an insurance company, State Farm or Farmers or Progressive, or somebody that's issuing a lot of property insurance policies in Oregon. Why don't we take their maps and use those? Why do we have OSU and ODF dreaming up their own maps? And the answer was because these are proprietary and we're not sharing them with you, which I understand because each company makes its own decisions based on its proprietary maps, and they have capital invested in this, and they've got to report back to their shareholders, and so this is not a new issue for the insurance carriers. In fact, when we were doing Senate Bill 82, the insurance carriers came in and supported that, and they said, look, we're happy to support this bill because it makes it clear to the public that we're not using the maps. And we're telling you right now, we're not using your maps. We've never used your maps and we never will use your maps. But trying to convince the public of that is really difficult. Now, that last bullet point, Oregon has a FAIR plan, what they call the FAIR plan. That's sort of coverage of last resort for folks, for property owners that can't get wildfire or can't get homeowners insurance due to whatever reason, typically wildfire, and we can't find a carrier that's willing to underwrite and issue a policy on that property. You can get coverage under the FAIR plan in Oregon, but the coverage isn't all that good. And I know they've raised coverage levels, and so it's better. But it's not that good and it's expensive. So the FAIR plan really is sort of the plan of last resort if you can't get coverage anywhere else. Next slide. So we went, Sam and I publish a blog on our website, on our Oregon Property Owners website. And Sam and I we do our own writing. And so our blog posts are typically either me blogging or Sam blogging. This is the first, we just did this last week. This is the first ever guest blog post we've had on our website. And we asked Kenton Brine, who runs the Northwest Insurance Council. It's a insurance trade association for insurance carriers. We asked Kenton Brine to do an article for us, again, to try and make the point clear that the insurance carriers are not relying on Oregon's map. And so you'll see the title to that. The Oregon Wildfire Hazard Map is back, and it can't affect your insurance. So we are trying to make this point clear. I know it's, again, people get stuck on it, but these maps do not impact insurance. Next slide. All right, so final thoughts. Is what I don't worry about and what keeps me up at night. What I don't worry about are two things: the defensible space rules and the home hardening requirements. And those are really the two requirements of Senate Bill 762. If you're high hazard and in the WUI, you have to do defensible space and you have to do home hardening if you want to rebuild. OSFM is a fantastic agency. You won't find an association or an organization that's more wary of state agencies than we are, but OSFM is doing a fabulous job. And besides, they don't have the staff to go around from property to property and start writing tickets for folks that aren't complying with the defensible space requirements. They're not going to do that. They don't have the staff. They're focused on education and encouragement. And the nice thing about both defensible space and on home hardening, home hardening is under your control. If you want to rebuild, you have to rebuild to hardened standards. If you want to do a significant remodel, you have to rebuild to home hardened standards. But understand that both defensible space and home hardening are win-wins. They're not just a win for the state of Oregon. They're a win for you. I mean, the goal of this is to make sure it's more difficult, and you do everything you can to protect your home and the people that live in your home. Well, defensible space and home hardening are two things that you can do that better ensure that your home will be protected in the case you are stuck in a wildfire situation. I have done the defensible space work around my house, not because it's defensible space, but just because I'm not a big fan of trees and I like lawn. So I have lots of lawn at my house and not as many trees. But the point is, the defensible space rules are not going to require you to essentially level all vegetation around the perimeter of your house. And you have an agency that wants to work with you, wants to help you, and we're working on getting more grant money available for folks that are maybe elderly or unable to do the work, so that we can get people out there to help you do that work and to maintain those defensible space requirements. So remember, people, if we fail at the defensible space and the home hardening criteria, if we fail at those, the same folks that want to stop anyone from living in rural Oregon will come in and say, see, we tried that, it didn't work. We now need to move into land use regulations where we tell property owners that if their house burns down, they can't put it back, or if they have a rural residential property, they can't put a house on it. And those are not win-wins. Those are an absolute loss for the property owner. So we have to do everything we can to make sure that the defensible space and home hardening rules are successful. And that's what we're hoping that we can convey to all of you today. What keeps me up at night, there's quite a few things. Ground truthing is one of them. It's a statewide map. OSU and ODF have done a good job with the map, but it's a statewide map. And it's based on numerical data. That's what the science is that led to the classifications and the WUI. It isn't ground truth tax lot by tax lot. It won't be ground truth tax lot by tax lot. And so what you're going to end up with is what we've been kindly referring to as anomalies. And basically what I'm saying is situations where you have areas on the map and they just don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Next slide. Jeremy, are we on a hard cap at 1 o'clock?
All right, two. Well, we some people may need to leave if they've only scheduled an hour, but we will keep going to get through all the questions as long as people are willing to stay. Yep.
All right, and I knew going in that this was going to be hard. This is a hard subject to get done in an hour, but we'll keep going. So what we're hoping on the ground truthing is that we can come up with legislation. Only the legislature can do this, where we can come up with legislation that gives folks a exceptions process, for lack of a better term, where they can come in and say, look, this just doesn't fit very well for me based on these criteria. That doesn't do violence to the science that OSU and ODF worked hard on to develop the maps. Land use, we've already gone through that. Land use is the big worry for me. It's a blunt tool. It has a high impact. DLCD is an agency with a history of overregulating, and they could conceivably use this to accomplish objectives that have absolutely nothing to do with wildfire, which really worries me. That's the one agency that I will keep the biggest eye on. And again, it's another reason why we need to make defensible space and home hardening work. The WUI criteria are overly broad. The wildland urban interface, the black dots. Katie, if you can go to the next slide and then come back to this one, but go to the next slide. Yeah, see that? That's out in Malheur County. If we went out further out on the aerial on that, there isn't any property around that for miles, or isn't any development around that for miles. The closest city is miles away from that. That ain't urban. There's wildland around it, but remember, the WUI is the wildland urban interface. There's nothing urban about that, but based on the criteria that they use to determine the WUI, that's in the WUI, and that's ridiculous. Go back the previous one. Thank you, Katie. The WUI criteria are overly broad. It would be nice if we could have another conversation about that so that we really focus the resources where we need them. Property insurance, I don't worry about the maps. What I really worry about is that at some point things are going to get so bad and the losses that the private insurance companies are going to suffer are going to be so high that they just decide to stop issuing policies in Oregon in high hazard areas. They're determined high hazard areas, because if they stop issuing policies, that's really going to negatively impact, as you all know, as realtors, the residential market, or actually any development market in the areas that where they're not issuing policies anymore. It's got the map has significant impacts on socially vulnerable populations. What we've discovered is people think people think that the socially vulnerable communities are in town. That's not true. What you find is that the majority pockets of socially vulnerable communities are living in rural areas, primarily because that's the only place they can afford to find a place to live. And so these regulations may have some significant impacts on them. The notice and appeals process is broken. It won't work very well. I'm afraid that people are going to be upset when they appeal their hazard classification and find out that the appeals process really doesn't work well for them. Only the legislature can fix this, and really what we're hoping that the way they fix this is through a better an exceptions process that we talked about in number one. And the last two things that keep me up at night are funding questions. The Oregon legislature and Congress have done an absolutely wretched job at funding our wildfire programs. We had land in Eastern Oregon this last month. We had fires starting in Eastern Oregon that rapidly grew. I mean, it's a tinderbox. And so you go from 10 acres to 1,000 acres in a heartbeat, where ODF could have put those fires out, but they didn't have the resources to hire the air tenders to come in and put those fires out. And so they grew, they just exploded. That's a funding issue, and that's on the legislature. And it's not those agencies. Those agencies and those first responders are doing an absolutely fantastic job trying to protect all of us. It's the legislature that won't direct resources there. So they need to be hit upside the head and told to do better on funding. And the last one is federal efforts. There's so much of our land, over 50, I think it's 55% of Oregon is owned by the federal government. If the feds aren't getting in there and doing their job, it doesn't really matter what we do at the state. Congress is more involved. Fortunately, Congress is starting to get it. It's bipartisan. And so I think we're going to see a better relationship between the various states and Congress actually dumping some money into solving this problem, or you'll never solve it, but making it better. And so next slide. And the slide after that. So we want to hear from you. The WPAC Wildfire Programs Advisory Council that both Sam and I sit on wants to hear from you. We meet quarterly. We don't ever hear from the public. That needs to change. We really want to hear from you. Next slide. And sorry, Jeremy, but whatever time we have left for questions, if you want to find out more, there's our website, OregonPropertyOwners.org, and come check out our blog. We post not just about wildfire, but about all things land use, from housing development inside the boundary to farmland designations in Deschutes County. We write about all of it. So there you go, Jeremy.
Dave, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, getting good feedback in the chat as well. And I think that you've laid the issues out very well. And I know it's 2 o'clock, but I do want to try to get through some questions if you're willing to stick around for a few minutes.
Sure.
And one question that is on my mind, and that Marilyn in the chat hit on as well, is that how does a homeowner, so let's say, we kind of take the thesis that you laid out, that, doing the home hardening, doing the defensible space is, the best way to both, protect lives and prevent more draconian regulations in the future. But people are worried about insurance, not based on the maps, but just worried about insurance. How do they demonstrate to their insurance carrier that they've done the home hardening, that they've done the defensible space, and that therefore they should be rated in a way that they maintain insurance and maintain affordable rates for their insurance?
Well, that's a really good question. And the answer to that is, again, that's proprietary, and how the carriers set their rate is going to be up to them. And the best thing that we can do as the public is use our checkbooks as the tool for making sure that we support the carriers that take those factors into account, and not those that don't. The game changer, and what I really hope to see, and the legislature can't regulate this. These are private companies making private decisions. But the game changer, Jeremy, for this is going to be the first carrier that offers discounts for folks who do defensible space and home hardening. If you do that, the first carrier that does that, we will publicize that. I hope, I don't know if you can as a trade association, but I hope everybody that is interested in this, if this issue will post that. We'll do it on our website saying this carrier is offering you a discount, because that's a game changer. Once one does it, we hope the others will, but if the others don't, and pick your insurance company, if they decide to offer a discount, we'll steer as many people over to that carrier as we possibly can, because that's the way you change things. This has to be a mindset by property owners. And really, I think if we come back 2 years from now, we're going to find, Jeremy, that people come back and say, "Oh, the defensible space is actually pretty good. It's easy, and I like it, and I don't mind doing it." So I think we'll get there, but we got to get the insurance companies to start offering discounts.
Dave, is there like sufficient kind of tables that are set right now for all the relevant parties, including the insurers, to be coming together to figure these kind of things out? Like, do you feel good about the direction of those conversations?
I do. I do. There have been, just so all of you know that are still on, in the last, we have suffered more, and this is one of the reasons for the increased rates. There have been more dollars lost in losses in the last 4 years from wildfire in Oregon than there have been in all of the years before, all of the decades before. We've lost more in the last 4 years. It's just been a tremendous impact, and that's why the insurance companies are doing what they're doing. They remember, a primary insurance company, not that they don't take all the risks themselves. They buy what's called reinsurance, they secondary insurance policies. So the insurers buy insurance coverage as well. That secondary insurance market is really screwed up because of all the various natural disasters: wildfire in the west, floods in the south, hurricanes and floods in the south, hail, and other damages in the Midwest. And so our insurance industry is really kind of screwed up right now just because of all the losses that we've had. But everyone is coming to the table. Unfortunately, this is an unfortunate event that led to fortunate results. When Canada burned last summer, all that smoke went to the east. All that smoke went down into Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden Congress started to care. And so the table is set. People are realizing it's a problem.
Yeah, no, and to that point, there's been some recent research that's come out regarding the health effects of that is pretty powerful. So one question, I don't know if you know the answer to this, Dave, and we will work to find an answer because I don't know, was the FAIR Plan. Do you know how mortgage companies view the FAIR Plan and whether that's an acceptable option with a
I
mortgage?
don't. I don't. You might call Andrew Stolfi at DFR and ask him.
Okay,
Andrew
great.
Stolfi, folks, is the state insurance commissioner. Uh, he knows he knows all on insurance.
Yeah. Dave, for those who do want to comment at this point in the process, where do you feel like there's still the most opportunity for input to be to influence the, the whether it's the map itself, the hazard areas, the WUI, any of the requirements on defensible space or home hardening?
Well, the ODF is the one that has to Oregon Department of Forestry. So it's the Board of Forestry that's going to ultimately adopt the maps, both the hazard maps and the WUI maps. So that would be the place to comment would be to the Oregon Department of Forestry. It would also be really nice to engage with your local legislators. It would also be really nice to engage with our council, with the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council. We're a really good group. We're 19 just volunteers. We don't work for the state. We don't get paid. We just volunteer. But we're 19 people that come from really different areas. Both our politics are vastly different, but we come together on wildfire programs, and we really need to hear more from the public. We just don't hear enough. And so contact your legislator, contact ODF, and get in touch with the council.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And just so everyone knows, we did put links in the chat of where you can comment. We have a web page we put up with Oregon Realtors that links to the map and how to comment on that, as well as how to comment on defensible space and home hardening. And so check that out, everyone in the chat. Dave, another question that, we got a question about the insurance companies and holding them accountable to not using the maps. One of the things I think that's in Senate Bill 82 is that if an insurance company does drop a customer or raise their rates based on wildfire, they have to inform them of what information they used and what they could do to their property to make it more insurable. Is that correct?
It is, and not only that, we have to be the state has to be really careful about how it treats our insurance companies. It's the same thing because again, they're just private businesses. It's the same thing that you and I, and I'm sure many of the folks on this webinar understand with land use regulation. If the state comes in and they say, we want more affordable housing, and so builders, we're going to make you build affordable housing, but we're going to prevent you from selling your houses for more than $250,000. And the builder says, well, it's cost me $600,000 to build the $250,000 house. What you end up with is nothing. And so the state has to be really careful. California got in there because the public was mad, and they adopted a series of restrictions on their insurance carriers. And the insurance carriers did basically the only thing they could do and said, look, the losses exceed what the state's allowing us to charge in premiums. So we're just not going to do business here anymore. If the state gets in and overregulates, what you're going to see is not lower premiums. What you're going to see is insurance companies just say, okay, I can't offer policies in your state anymore. And that does not help us.
Thanks, Dave. One question, just going through the chat here. One question was about the frequency with which these maps will be updated. Do you know?
Yeah, I believe it's every 4 years. Whoever that is, Jeremy, keep that question. I will get an answer to that and get it to you.
Great. We had another question about the 50 feet on the defensible space. Is it 50 feet from the home? And what if that crosses into a different property?
Yeah, it's 50 feet from the perimeter of the home, and it will only apply to the boundaries of the property. So you don't have to go out, and you don't have the ability to go out and cut your neighbor's, Himalayan blackberries, which are the scourge of the world, out of their field because they're not willing to do it.
Dave, one of the things that struck me, and you hit on this a couple times in your presentation, is the expansiveness of the WUI. And it's a million properties, and I think you said there was 100 and something thousand that were high risk. So that means there's somewhere around 900,000 properties that are WUI but not high risk. And one thing that's really important to our members, because they're out selling real estate, working with their clients, they have to fill out their clients have to fill out the seller property disclosure statement, for example, and that includes a question on this. Is your home, and just so everyone knows, the question on the SPDS currently says, is your home in the forest land urban interface? But the legislature did pass a law saying that that means the wildland urban interface. So that would mean that a million plus people would need to disclose, including 900,000 that aren't in high risk areas. To me, that feels kind of like a California Prop 65, everything causes cancer, where therefore nothing causes cancer. So one, like, do you agree that it maybe sort of dampens the effect and impact that it's trying to have by having so many properties included? And two, if so, how do you think that there is an opportunity to get movement on the WUI? I look at those factors that you listed there, and it seems that the WUI definition is very flimsy and very potentially subjective. Do you think that that's something that potentially could be narrowed so that it would have more of an impact in making people aware who are truly at risk?
Yeah, absolutely. The WUI definition, I think of everything in on the wildfire programs, how that's being handled right now is probably the worst part of it all. Again, we're very supportive of the program they're doing. It's a good program, but that WUI definition is bad. And the reason the WUI definition is bad, and I was on the Rules Advisory Committee that came up with that definition and fought like heck to make sure that this wasn't the definition used. But the reason it's bad is because they call anything urban if you have a concentration of structures of more than one structure per 40 acres. And a structure is defined as not just a dwelling, but anything that's more than 400 feet in size. And so, you know, a fairly small accessory building, for example, can be considered a structure, a barn, a shed, a structure, and one house per, one structure per 40 acres under any definition, any reasonable definition, is not urban. And so the problem is you overmap the number of lots that are within the WUI, and the primary use of the WUI should be to focus states' limited resources. You don't get good bang for your buck when you go and you focus on putting fires out in that picture that I showed everyone from Malheur County. Those people are going to be probably be pretty self-sufficient because they're basically out there on their own. And it's not to say that we discard them or just tell them you're on your own. But in a case of a conflagration where you have to maximize your bang for your buck, you're going to want to have a definition of the WUI that really focuses on areas where you've got a concentration of dwellings, not structures, of people living in an area right next to a wildland fuel source. And that rule is bad and doesn't do that. So I'd like to fix that. Fortunately, that's a rule, which means that it could be fixed by the agency, but I think the legislature ought to take a look at that.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And then we'll wrap up here in a minute. Just two quick hit questions that you covered, but I just want to be clear for everyone because I saw some questions in the chat. One, home hardening would be required if you're in the WUI and in high hazard, regardless of whether you're doing any development on your property. Home hardening only if you're doing new development on your property, redevelopment, but the defensible space requirements are not dependent upon you doing any development or remodeling your property.
Yeah. If you're subject to defensible space, that's going to be implementable as soon as the agency rolls out the rule.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, don't be afraid to call OSFM. Chad Hawkins would be the contact there. They basically have 13 people to go around statewide to all of these. They don't have the resources. and they don't want to go out and write tickets. They're not, they want people, they want to help people. It's the anti-DLCD. It's a good agency.
And then final question is on those, we did get some comments and you mentioned that because it's a statewide map, there may be some anomalies that are there where, it's like a sea of one color and one property that shows up as a different color. So, but just to be clear with everyone, if somebody believes that they're in the wrong play, category area and they appeal, the maps aren't going to be changed at an individual property level, or are they?
They would have to prove that the science that they use, that OSU used to map, to designate risk classification on their property was wrong. And so what I'm really afraid of is that people are going to think that the appeal process is going to give the agency the ability to use common sense and say, okay, look, here's an example, Jeremy. Brasada Ranch has in Crook County over towards Prineville. It's a destination resort. There's 750 lots there. Out of those 750 plus lots in Brasada, there are 747 that are at moderate risk and three at high or moderate hazard and three at high hazard. If I owned one of those three high hazard properties, I would be a little upset saying, okay, why are the other 747 of my neighbors at moderate hazard and I'm at high hazard? The science, I suspect, justifies that. And so the map is technically correct. But those kind of stories are the ones that make people really cynical about these maps. And so the legislature would be smart to figure out a way that we could fix some of those without doing violence to the science.
And Dave, is the science available? I mean, that's one of the comments I've heard is that, FEMA, for example, with flood maps, you can get the information that they use to designate those areas to ground truth it, or to test it. But is that the case here, or is the information available that went into the maps to match?
Yes. Yeah. OSU, and this gets real eggheady and tough for me to wander through because I'm not a fire scientist. But I've heard their presentations, and the the one thing that they are limited by, however, is the four factors that the legislature gave them to look at when developing the maps. I haven't ever asked, Andy McAvoy, for example, at OSU, he's a fire science professor at OSU. I've never asked him if those factors are the correct factors, the only factors, too many factors. I haven't asked that question, but I'm sure he'd be able to give you an answer in mind-numbing detail.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much. The final thing I just want to ask, because people have asked, could we make these slides available to our members?
Oh, sure.
Okay, wonderful. Well, big round of applause, everyone, for Dave Honeycutt. This was excellent information, well presented, and really appreciate your time, Dave, and willingness to stay on even a little bit longer.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.